will be one of the most challenging enumerations that the Census Bureau would have to undertake in 2020 for a number of reasons and situations that you've already covered. The COVID-19 pandemic simply has made that challenge much more difficult for the Census Bureau. Adding to that, political interference by the administration has also further complicated the work of the Census Bureau career professionals. So what I'd like to do is to cover a little bit about what some developments from this week, and then some other issues that I think are important for you all to follow and things to look for as the Census Bureau undertakes the non-response follow-up operation in a couple of weeks. First, the policy memo that the Trump administration or the president himself released on Tuesday. One thing to make clear is that the president is not asking for undocumented immigrants not to be counted in the census. And we're very concerned there has been coverage and a great deal of media suggesting that immigrants are not to be counted. That is not what the policy memo is asking for. The policy memo is asking for the Secretary of Commerce, after the census is itself completed, to somehow remove from the count of every state a certain number of persons believed to be undocumented immigrants. And the only way to do that would be to use some sort of estimates or sampling of populations in order to determine how many persons in each state is an undocumented immigrant. This is extremely imprecise. And as we said in our statement that we released on Tuesday, this amounts to nothing more than cooking the numbers, of making up an entire new data set on which to base the most important element of our democracy, and that's the reapportionment of representation in the House of Representatives. What I believe is also an assault on the American sensibility is that the president pretends to be able to amend the Constitution by memo. Nothing could be more offensive. This is, in fact, the president asking for immigrants to be excluded from the actual count. And we already know that we are lagging in response rates in heavy Latino areas around the country. On June 17th, we conducted a town hall where we released data that was a deep dive into the response rates that the Census Bureau releases on a daily basis. And while the Census Bureau crows about reaching its goal of 60.1% of response rates sometime in June, remember that goal was supposed to have been reached on April 31st. And even if now we're close to 63% of households having self-responded, that still means 37% of America's households have yet to respond to the census. And the only way they will be counted is if they answer the knock on the door through non-response follow-up. That's an operation that's supposed to begin on August 11th. There are a couple things we need to look for to see how successful this will be. One is, to the extent that the Census Bureau will be able to deploy a satisfactory workforce that is both in numbers and in cultural competence to be able to go into the diverse neighborhoods where the response rates are the lowest, to be able to knock on doors, and to do so in a way that is safe, given local public health protocols that are requiring, of course, social distancing, use of personal protective equipment, and the like. We know that the Census Bureau has purchased millions of pieces of personal protective equipment for their enumerators to use. But we also know that they're experiencing some challenges in the enumerators actually feeling fully comfortable in going door to door and trying to get responses from these households that have yet to fill out their forms. This will be especially challenging, not just in single family dwellings, but when enumerators have to go into, say, apartment buildings, where that kind of social distancing is simply practically impossible. And to the extent that enumerators will be able to get the information that's needed to complete the count. So first, in terms of how will the Department of Commerce arrive at a number of undocumented immigrants, It would simply be by making estimates. Not only is there no question on the decennial census on citizenship, there is also no question on immigration status. There is no way to determine the exact number of individuals who are undocumented, and even to determine what constitutes undocumented status in itself often requires a expert lawyer to understand the different definitions of status in this country. Would this include, for example, a DACA recipient? Would it include somebody who's seeking asylum and has not yet received residency in this country? Who determines who's undocumented and not? And so these data would somehow need to be applied to each state. Now, will it result in gerrymandering? What it will result in is a malapportionment of the House of Representatives. And it will be done in complete violation of the Constitution. The language of the Constitution says to apportion the House of Representatives based on the whole number of persons. And that whole number has to come from the census. And now the administration wants to play with the numbers after the census to come up with a new figure on which to reapportion the House.
Let me be clear. The goal has not changed. The goal is to make sure that all of our communities are fairly and accurately counted. That goal has not changed because of this July 21 presidential memorandum. And our charge to our community, our charge to our population remains the same, that they should respond to the census regardless of immigration status. As Arturo said, there is no immigration status question whatsoever on the census. And we would encourage people to respond either by telephone, online, or if they have the paper form, to respond by paper. If you do that, then depending on when the Census Bureau might send the door knockers or enumerators, they might not come to your door because you have already responded to the census. So first and foremost, we want our communities to respond to the census. And we know here that there are places where our Asian American population have not been responding in rates that we would like. Currently, about 40% of the Asian population has not yet responded to the census. And we want to make sure that they understand the importance and respond. We recognize that COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on all of our communities. And part of this is to ensure that all of us have that ability and recognize the importance of the census. The other important deadline to note is that right now the deadline for responding is October 31. So again, you can respond in all of these different forms by October 31. And likewise, as Arturo talked about, with respect to the operations, there are going to be enumerators that will be sent out depending on the circumstances related to COVID-19. So let me talk about the July 21 presidential memorandum. As Arturo said, the memorandum has nothing to do with our current 2020 census that is taking place. And so that should not be a reason for people not to respond. What the memorandum does do is suggest that undocumented communities will not count for purposes of dividing up congressional representation, apportionment, if you will, between the states. Let me say this, that is patently unconstitutional. Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution makes clear that apportionment is based on all persons in the United States. The Constitution, other places, makes clear that it understands the difference between citizens and persons. And the suggestion that somehow undocumented immigrants are not people or not persons just flies in the face of logic, flies in the face of Supreme Court precedent, and flies in the face of legislative history and policy of the United States for several hundred years. Look, we are all counted. The census counts every person living in the country, regardless of whether they are citizens and regardless of their immigration status. And so that's one thing that we need to be clear about. It is clear that there are groups that are going to litigate this matter. My group litigated initially the citizenship question in the 2020 census when the Commerce Department tried to impose that. As you all know, a number of organizations did, and we won. We are looking at the same thing here. We already have litigation against the Census Bureau on a different aspect of the Census Bureau policy with respect to how they are looking at citizenship data. We are certainly looking at including in litigation this presidential memorandum. Clearly, this presidential memorandum is unconstitutional, and we need to make sure that it stays such. The memorandum at bottom seeks to shift that political representation away from places that have large immigrant communities by define the census's constitutional mandate to ensure that each state is represented in proportion to total population. Again, it's total population and not citizenship. So it is imperative for our communities to rise above the fear tactics that are being used, rise above the misinformation that is being used, and to participate in the census.
Our message today is really simple. Avoid the knock, respond today. And that is the message that we're carrying throughout our region. I was on a forum with the mayors of New Orleans and Jackson, Mississippi just 2 days ago. Mayor Cantrell, from the moment she was inaugurated and we had our first meeting with her shortly about a month later, she immediately said, I understand the importance of New Orleans really getting every household to participate in the census. We were in the wake of Katrina. Many of our residents had not returned home. We were trying to rebuild. So the 2020 census for us is the first one after Katrina. And right now, New Orleans is about 10, almost 10 and a half points above where they were in self-response in 2010. The mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, we met with him shortly after he was inaugurated. And he immediately formed a complete count committee. He is also on the state complete count committee. And he is a strong advocate for the census. And one of the things that what really runs deep with these mayors is they're saying, what's in it for you? Let me tell you. And they're putting it in people's minds and letting people understand that the programs and the services that they value for themselves, their families, and their communities in those funding formulas are these population numbers. And then we come to a state like Florida, where we have a city, Hialeah, and Hialeah's population is just under 250,000, almost predominantly of Hispanic origin, with a 64% response rate. And in talking with the commission, just one of the commissioners just yesterday, I told him, I said, one thing about Hialeah I love, because you all are reacting as if your self-response rate is 20%, not above the national average. And he says, we are really working hard. And seriously, they are. And then we look at the city of Miami, where the response rate is less than 50%. And I have had chats with Mayor Suarez. And then we look at Opa-locka, which is a predominantly Black population, with a response rate just under 54%. And today I noticed that one of their most trusted voices, a community organization, is sending out text messages to all of the households in Opa-locka. The city of Atlanta has some very noted trusted voices to help with Atlanta counts, such as Killer Mike. And he has really honed the message home to a population that is really hard to reach. You know, they listen to a certain segment of music, certain shows. They haven't seen any of our commercials on TV, but they're on Instagram and other social media platforms where those people that they follow really post a lot. And so that has helped us. So for me, when I started with the Census Bureau in 1998 as a temporary employee, and here I am 22 years later, and look at the history of participating in the census, I told people that up until 1950, the enumerator came to your house, sat down with your family in the living room or on the front porch, and completed the census for the family with their responses. In earlier years, when the enumerators came, they identified who you were. And so now here we are starting in 1960 for self-response. Here we are in the 21st century. We have the opportunity to identify who we are, to ensure that our entire family is counted, that resources will be flowing to our communities. Even though our schools will be opening in some means this fall, those superintendents aren't saying that your parents participate in the census because even virtually, we don't have enough slots. Those Head Start programs are very concerned, do they have enough slots for all the children? And the question that I ask people every day, Look in the mirror and say, do our census numbers support our needs? So the 10 minutes that you take to complete the census will assure your fair share over the next 10 years. And that's the only message that I tell our staff to give. The less than 10 minutes for 10 years of services. In order to count, you must be counted. We would rather not have to follow up on any household starting on August the 11th. We would rather this be the smallest percent of non-response follow-up in the history of our nation.
We have been facing an uphill battle, unfortunately, on a couple of different fronts. First of all, we have been undercounted the last 2 decades, and that in and of itself is problematic because we try to figure out why that happened, how to avoid that. And another one of the big challenges that we have faced is the fact that this census has been primarily promoted to be a self-response online. A lot of the parts in our county simply do not have internet connectivity, so that has really caused us to shift messaging and gears towards a more of an in-person interaction, which really brings me to the development of COVID-19. That has really thrown a wrench into our operations because that's really stopped us from doing a lot of our in-person outreach that would help us reach these key demographics that have historically been undercounted. Throughout the last few months, we've all been kind of on hold, hoping that this would clear up or ease up a little bit. But unfortunately, our county specifically has become one of the hotspots for COVID-19 in the entire country. So really that has shifted a lot of attention towards that. We are facing, like it has been mentioned by different leaders here, a sense of census fatigue also. And again, these are all uphill battles that we are trying to overcome. And this week with the announcement of the administration's actions, that's simply another hurdle that we have to overcome. We are a very large, the majority of Hidalgo County is minority. We have a demographic of undocumented residents here, people residing here. So this really is going to be a very big challenge. Like it was mentioned by Mr. Arturo Vargas, this is a very complex issue that can very easily be mistaken. The details of it can be mistaken, and it's very hard to truly digest and get to the core of what is being instituted by the administration. And unfortunately, what we have seen, like we saw with the citizenship question, is simply the results of the messaging affecting our community. So how I like to approach it is we can look at potential effects and real life effects if this is to stand. And the real life effects are going to be extremely detrimental to us simply because we are a large community with undocumented immigrants here. Our political representation would suffer, and being one of the poorer areas of the entire country, I'm sure this would bleed into the federal funding side of it. But really, even the potential effects, even if this doesn't uphold, the messaging side of this has been so damaging in our area because people simply don't have the time, they don't have the ability to dive into the weeds of what is actually going on, and they're just entirely taken back and dissuaded from actually participating in the census. Months after the citizenship question has been taken down by the Supreme Court, we're still facing the effects of the citizenship question here. We're facing every day, we interact with people who ask, well, I heard they're asking for citizenship information, which is simply not true. So affects actions like the ones taken this week by the administration, that in and of itself, whether it stands, whether it doesn't stand, in and of itself is going to be very, very damaging for our region and the future of our region. Really, we have one of the best examples going on in our county, the COVID-19 situation. If you are not counted, events like what we're going through right now are going to be much worse. Things like education, things like infrastructure. And really, that's all we can do at the moment is really just push this message of the importance and continue our outreach. We have shifted a lot of our outreach due to the COVID-19 development to virtual outreach. And like Ms. Stevens has said they've done in their area, we've reached into and tapped into a lot of the local voices, a lot of the local trusted partners, not just government officials, not just nonprofit organizations, but a lot of the local celebrities to say, and really get them to share our message, because as it was mentioned, the state did not allocate any resources toward this. So this has really landed on a lot on our plate to try to promote it, and we have found that has been successful. We're reaching to these people, to our schools, or essentially the trusted voices of the community, to spread this message and push the importance of it.
I'm here representing the state of California and the tribes. I'm the only one working with tribes across the state. We have two great partners, the California Indian Manpower Consortium and the California Native Vote Project, who are doing tons of work virtually and have boots on the ground and are just doing amazing work in this pivot that we've had to make for COVID-19. And so the state's invested about $2 million to the tribes and to make sure that the tribes are counted. So some of the reasons why this is especially important to tribes are for sovereignty. So tribes have sovereign government-to-government relationships with the United States, and this has allowed tribes to declare a state of emergency and not allow any of the enumeration and to decide how they want that process to take place with update leave, with NARFU. We also have tribal partnership specialists from the U.S. Census Bureau that are working on a case-by-case basis with tribes to see how that will take place, what PPE will be needed, and how all of those operations, if they needed a security guard to walk through the reservation. And so because these are government-to-government relationships, it's been a very unique and challenging process for tribes, where a lot of the update leave process started early on. Tribes were closed due to the COVID pandemic. And so they're really starting update leave really late. And based on their, again, case-by-case relationship with the U.S. Census Bureau. So while everybody else was responding to the census without a unique ID, whether or not update leave had happened yet, tribes were instructed to wait for the unique identifier. And so update leave would identify the household, the location, and leave a packet with the unique identifier, and then tribal households could respond to the census. Now, some of those tribes still to this day have not received those unique identifiers, which is causing a huge challenge, of course, because they're not being able to match those addresses with the household that is responding. One issue that we're working with the U.S. Census Bureau is that if tribes remain closed, how will we get them counted? And so we have NARFU that's coming up, and the U.S. Census Bureau is making a big push to hire someone within the tribe that lives on the reservation that can go and knock on doors and complete the NARFU process. And so that's kind of the push. They gave us until about August 17th to get people trained, hired, background checked, and out there to be knocking on doors of tribes. And so this is a big challenge for us. Our numbers are pretty low across the state. There are 110 tribes that are federally recognized. About 59 of those fall under the operations of the U.S. Census Bureau. And there's a handful that, like I said, have not received their packets yet. So of those tribes, the numbers are kind of scattered. We have some tribes at 60% response rate, and a lot of tribes are like hovering around 20 to 30% response rate, and about 20 tribes that are like under 15% response rate. The positive thing is that our response rates are greater than they were in 2010. So all the work that the partners are doing, they're being very innovative, having drive-through movie nights, all types of different activities that are very innovative for people. So I think those efforts are working. We're doing better than we did in 2010, and we'll keep striving for a complete count.